Don't smile at the Morose Man. He had a sullen disposition, so I thought I could brighten his day with a smile. That was a terrible idea. He certainly wasn't the only gloomy character I'd ever spotted on the early evening train. For many of us, it's a long journey home from the city. We wear crestfallen expressions, decompressing after another soul-crushing day at work. Nevertheless, this particular man caught my attention. He was standing on the opposite side of the carriage, firmly fixated on the doors behind me. His vacant brown eyes hardly seemed to register what they were seeing. His brow was a mountainous ridge, and his skin sagged, as if it were too loose for the bald head on which it hung. Above all else, he was sulking. I'm a kind girl, so I smiled. If only I could retract that smile. It took a long time for the sour-faced gentleman to notice the teenager beaming at him. It may, in fact, have only been a couple of seconds, but that certainly feels like a long time to maintain an unreciprocated smile. Eventually, thankfully, the man turned to face me. However, his expression did not change. Only his head moved, and it simply rotated enough to ensure that his eyes were securely locked onto mine. I waited for his frown to capsize. It didn't. The man shook his head accusingly, shook his head as if to say, "You shouldn't be doing that." It was a slight movement, but that made this all the more disturbing. My glowing grin immediately dissipated, and I cast my eyes to the ground, feeling humiliated. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, ignoring my scorching cheeks. Oh, how many more stops? I wondered. The most perturbing thing about the entire situation was that the man refused to look away from me. Despite my averted gaze, I could still feel those button eyes boring into my skull. I could see him in my peripheral vision. He did not move. He just stared sullenly. I did what I always do in uncomfortable situations. I opened Reddit and switched to my throwaway account. That's what Redditors use when they don't want to be identified online. After fully explaining my predicament on a subreddit, I asked for advice on dealing with intimidating people. Most commenters called the man a pervert, a freak, or a creep. They told me not to worry. They said to move down the carriage and stay away from him. Sensible advice. But one user started a private chat with me. I won't include his name, but he had something unsettling to ask. Why would you smile at the Morose Man? I raised an eyebrow. He's screwing with me, I thought. I asked why the Redditor was calling the stranger such a bizarre name. From your description, I knew who you'd seen. He isn't human. I played along with the prankster, and I asked about the Morose Man, who I assumed to be some sort of urban legend, a childish creepypasta. He minds his own business, unless somebody disturbs his peace, and you just disturbed him. You need to get off that train and run. His wrath eventually subsides, and he goes on his way. The man will pursue you until midnight. My chest started to tighten. I was no believer in ghost stories, but I somehow knew that the Reddit user was telling the truth. I felt it. I could feel it in the morose passenger's awful eyes, which were still watching me. I asked the mystery internet messenger what the man was going to do. He didn't seem particularly threatening, simply unnerving. Just stay away from him. What time is it in your part of the world? It was around 7 in the evening. Right. 5 hours. 5 hours until midnight. Okay. Just keep moving and make sure that you avoid doorways. I found that final sentence a little peculiar, but it was definitely no stranger than the user's claim that the dismal gentleman was some sort of unearthly being. Whatever the case, my gut was growling at me. I don't scare easily, but the stranger on the train terrified me. He and I remained frozen in that state for another 20 minutes or so. When the train eventually reached the next station, I reversed through the open doors like a gentle breeze, praying I'd go unnoticed. I was too afraid to turn my back on the Morose Man. I still hadn't looked up from my phone, but I felt safe as long as I could vaguely see him. Once I was on the platform, I stopped walking backwards. I stood and waited, trying my best to watch the man out of the corner of my vision. He didn't move. He stayed on the train, and the doors closed. I cried exuberantly as the train pulled away. Then reality hit me. What a fool you've made of yourself, Paige, I thought. He was just an ordinary man, wasn't he? You let anxiety get the better of you. And now you're at the wrong station. Fantastic. The foreboding feeling in my belly may have simply passed because the stranger's gaze was no longer upon me. Still, I felt normal again. I felt stupid, actually, and I shook my head as I began to stroll out of the station. But I didn't immediately leave. I was bursting for the toilet. I hate public bathrooms, but I knew I still had a long journey ahead of me, so I decided to face my phobia. I strolled into the train station's empty bathroom, which was illuminated by a cold, clinical fluorescent light. Choosing the first cubicle, I entered, sat down, and opened the Uber app. I was roughly 40 minutes from home by car, and most of the nearby Ubers were not really nearby at all. After 10 minutes of faffing, I booked one, and groaned at the 30-minute estimated wait time. I figured out the journey in my head. 8 o'clock. Home by 8:45. Great. I'll only have time for dinner, and I'll have to go straight to bed. The main door to the bathroom suddenly opened. I ignored it, continuing to scroll down my phone. Shoes clomped across the tiled floor. They sounded slow, heavy, measured. I looked down to see 2 smart black shoes poking beneath the bottom of my cubicle door. "There are 2 other toilets," I pointed out. There came a knock. Just one. I looked a little more closely at the black footwear and realised, much to my terror, that I was staring at men's shoes. Excuse me," I shyly whispered. Are you in the right bathroom?" Another knock. "Just go away," I shrieked. I hoped somebody would come. Somebody had to come. An awful fear overcame me, not an earthly fear. Without fully accepting why I was doing it, I frantically opened my phone and messaged the Reddit user. "I don't think you need me to tell you who's on the other side of that door." I asked my anonymous saviour what I should do. "Do not leave the cubicle. I told you to stay away from doorways. Just wait for somebody else to come into the bathroom. The Morose Man does not like to be disturbed. If somebody enters, he should leave." So, I waited. And waited. I waited until the Uber came and left. Then something dawned on me. I could hide in the cubicle until morning. I just had to make it to midnight. No such luck, according to my online guru. Closer to midnight, his patience wears thin. Soon, he won't be polite. You should pray that somebody enters and interrupts him. I looked at the time on my phone. 8:37 p.m. Then I looked at the bottom of the cubicle door. The knocking had subsided, but the shoes remained. I leaned to one side of the toilet seat, peering through the crack between the door and the cubicle wall, hoping to catch a glimpse of the figure on the other side. I couldn't see him. He was standing too far to the left. And then a face slid into view, peeking through the gap and revealing an insidious being. One large pupil observed me, an eye that had transformed from brown to black. I shuddered, instantly jerking myself back to the centre of the toilet seat, not daring to move again. I wanted to keep messaging my Reddit friend, but he also gave me the creeps. Why did the online stranger know so much about the Morose Man anyway? I searched for information about the malicious entity on the internet, and I found nothing. To calm myself, I decided to embrace my position of powerlessness, and I simply distracted myself with social media. I wanted something grounded, something based in reality. I never thought I'd say such a thing about social networks. Wait, the police! I thought. I hurriedly dialed 999, and I was asked which emergency service I needed. I opened my mouth to answer, but then... Six knocks. A series of enraged thuds rattled the cubicle door back and forth. My mouth gaped, but no sound escaped my lips. I was petrified. A shushing sound quietly hissed from the other side of the door. I hung up the phone. After all, I had been warned that it was not a good idea to disturb the Morose Man. What other options did I have? I had the idea to ask the Reddit messenger to call the police on my behalf. But the Morose Man shushed me more aggressively, as if he were reading my thoughts. I thought of screaming for help. And the man unleashed a croaking wail that sounded like a feral beast caught in a bear trap. I stopped thinking of solutions. Do not disturb him. I waited. 9:27 p.m. I was running out of time. Trains kept arriving, but nobody was coming into the bathroom, and there wouldn't be many more trains before midnight. That meant there wouldn't be many more potential bathroom goers. Nobody to disturb the entity for me. With every passing moment, I replayed the Reddit user's message in my head. Soon, he won't be polite. 10:31 p.m. The knocking resumed, and the overhead light started to dim, as if the Morose Man were gradually extinguishing it. I shivered, lifting my knees up to my chin and wrapping my arms around them. 11:41 p.m. After 4 hours in the bathroom, I heard a train, possibly the last train of the evening, pull into the station. The bathroom door finally opened, and two inebriated, chattering women entered. The black shoes of the Morose Man speedily scuttled to the cubicle beside me, and he quickly closed the door behind him. I hate having to touch gross handles after washing my hands, one of the girls said. I'm going to wedge this door open with my shoe. Chantal, I don't want to talk about bathroom doors. You're such a... Did you just see that man, Tara? Chantal whispered, interrupting her friend. Don't change the subject, Tara said. You know that guy in the club saw me first and... Tara stopped mid-sentence, watching me hurtle from my cubicle like a deranged animal and slip on the damp floor. I was sprinting towards the exit. You alright, love? Tara drunkenly slurred. Please, I begged. Move out of the way. I need to get out of here. Yeah, I told you there was a creepy man in here, Tara, Chantal said, marching past me. He's been harassing this poor girl, I bet. Hey, mate! My heart sank as I turned to see Chantal strutting towards the cubicle I'd seen the morose man enter. She pounded furiously on the middle door. Don't do that, I pleaded. We've got you, babe, Tara promised, patting my back. Arrgh! Chantal roared like a lioness and booted the cubicle door inwards with the one high-heeled shoe that she was still wearing. The door practically detached from its hinges, ricocheting off the cubicle wall. I held my breath, waiting for the man to charge at her. What? Chantal gasped. He's not in here. Tara snorted with laughter. You're so dumb, Chantal. You've imagined him. Sweat oozed from my goosebump-riddled flesh. The man had strolled into the cubicle beside me. I heard him. Where did he go? I wondered. Everything about the situation was horribly wrong. I started to back towards the bathroom exit, bumping into Tara, who was still blocking the doorway. Chantal frowned. No, I'm telling you that... The girl trailed off. Her complexion whitened, and her jaw slackened as her arms fell stiffly to her sides. Chantal unleashed a primal scream of horror. Consumed by fear, I realised that I hadn't bumped into Tara. I took a few tentative steps forwards, before slowly spinning on my heel. The bathroom exit led onto a pitch-black train station. The lights were gone, the people were gone. All I saw was the morose man, and the unholy act that he was committing. Tara's body was slowly being ingested into the mouth of the black-eyed entity. He had grown a foot taller, and his looming figure filled most of the doorway. His morose mouth had broadened to squeeze Tara's still squirming body inside. He used the abnormally long fingers on his gnarled, ghoulish hands to hold the girl's ankles. The man forced her, head first, into his nightmarish gullet. I started to back towards the cubicles, and Chantal ran towards the exit, screeching at the entity and begging it to release her friend. The man was still greedily swallowing Tara's spasming body, but he unwrapped one hand from her ankle to seize Chantal by the neck. As I continued to creep towards the farthest cubicle, I watched the morose man complete one course and prepare for the next. Chantal was certainly much louder than Tara. She unleashed a series of short, muffled whimpers from the creature's body as he slid her down his throat. I threw open the cubicle door, locked it behind me, and immediately looked at my phone. 11:43 p.m. That traumatizing scene of unfathomable gore took place in the space of 2 minutes. Shoes boomed against the tiles, and I found myself where I'd started. I was trapped in the bathroom stall, eyeing black loafers which slid through the bottom of the door. The morose man had grown so large that he could poke his head over the top of the cubicle. The atrocious apparition, which still wore that dejected expression, shook its head at me. His morbid frown lifted into a sickening smile for a split second, then it quickly returned to a state of moroseness. He was mimicking the act of kindness I'd displayed on the train. He was reminding me of what I'd done wrong. I flipped the toilet lid down, scrambled onto it, and squished my body against the back wall, trying to escape the wretched thing on the other side of the door. The morose man was not finished. Midnight was approaching, and his patience was departing. The elongated fingers on the man's two hands suddenly appeared, grasping the top of the cubicle door. He violently wobbled the wood in its hinges. I started to blubber, looking down at the phone in my hand. 11:45 p.m. Every minute felt like an eternity. I wouldn't make it to midnight. I was sure of that. The man reached an arm over the top of the cubicle door, stretching his hellish fingers towards the lock. The creature patted clumsily, trying to find a way to slide the door open. I turned to my right and started to pull myself over the wall of the cubicle beside me. At the very moment I landed on the other side, I heard the lock slide across. The monster barreled into the cubicle I'd just exited. I had moments to spare, so I fled the middle cubicle and ran towards the bathroom exit. Welcoming the dark embrace of the train station, I didn't pause to look over my shoulder. I already knew that the morose man was pursuing me. He could find me anywhere. That was when I remembered what the Reddit user had repeatedly told me. Stay away from doorways. As I ran across the train platform, I looked over my shoulder. The man was striding forwards at a petrifying pace. I kept running. I ran until I reached the end of the platform, and then I realised I'd foolishly forgotten how to exit the train station. That being said, I wouldn't have wanted to risk the doorway. Throwing caution to the wind, with my life hanging in the balance, I took the only other exit available. I jumped down from the platform, landing on the railway line. I followed the tree-lined train tracks, stealing a glance at my phone. 11:51 p.m. When I looked behind, I screamed. The morose man was even taller than any human, and he seemed faster, much faster. I had to get out of the open. I was too exposed. I veered to the right, entering the forest, and I lit the way with my phone. No doors in the woods, and the trees were tightly grouped together, so the gargantuan man would struggle to follow. It seemed like my best option. I weaved between trees, casting my torchlight before me so as not to bump into anything. I didn't want to end up flat on my face. I didn't want to be the morose man's dessert. I heard that unearthly wail once more. It was terrifying enough to startle all of the creatures in the forest. Birds flew from trees. I switched my phone off, but I had a feeling the man would find me without any light, even without a doorway. Just a few minutes, Paige. Keep running. Other than the sound of my shoes crunching against leaves, the forest was completely silent. I barely distinguished the outlines of trees in the darkness. The canopy of leaves blocked the moonlight. I heard the reverberating snap of what sounded like a thick tree branch. The man was close. I wanted so desperately to check the time on my phone, but I tried to rely on my body clock. Every second felt like an hour, but I knew that I only had a few minutes left. A few minutes until the man left me alone. I lunged forwards, failing at stealthily traversing the forest. Each step seemed to make noisy contact with leaves and twigs. I tried to quicken my pace, because there was no use in concealing my location. The Morose Man knew exactly where to find me. Low breathing tickled my right ear. Not daring to turn around, I screamed at the top of my lungs and sprinted ahead, roughly scraping my shoulder against the jagged bark of a tree. I grimaced, but adrenaline pushed me onwards. I reached for the phone in my pocket and used it as my flashlight once more. I needed to know the time. 11:59 p.m. I continued to maneuver, praying that I wouldn't trip, praying that I wouldn't bump into another tree. One more obstacle could be the death of me. And then the time on my phone changed. Midnight. I yelled triumphantly, twisting around. My phone's flashlight made contact with the horrifying spectre pursuing me. The Morose Man was far thinner, but he was also level with the treetops, slinking his skeletal body through the forest. My heart thumped. The Reddit user lied. The Morose Man never stops, I thought. I closed my eyes and braced for death. Succumbing to a horror no human should endure, I felt a brittle limb brush against my clothes. I opened my eyes to see the man walking past me, grazing one of his spindly legs against my coat. I turned around, casting my light onto the eldritch horror, and I watched the spider-like man vanish into the depths of the forest. If you ever see a morose gentleman, do not disturb him. Do not smile at him.
If you see it, it has already seen you. Whatever you do, don't smile at it. After seeing the forlorn thing, I rushed to an occult forum. There I met my nameless hero, and she recounted the tale of her harrowing night in a train station bathroom. She was hounded mercilessly by a thing that she called the Morose Man. But I wouldn't call it that. It was no man. At midnight, it departs. That was what she told me. And I'm usually skeptical about campfire tales from the underbelly of the internet, but I will believe everything I read about this unknown horror. After all, I've seen it for myself. A week ago, I was walking home from the office. Another evening of unpaid overtime. And that's always made worse by a chilly stroll down blackened streets at night. Liverpool is spectacular, but it's also an urban nightmare. The city can be a leery place at 11 in the morning, never mind 11 at night. "Alright, pet," a man slurred at me. I kept my head to the ground, zigzagging through a cluster of inebriated scousers. 10 minutes later, I escaped to the safety of the suburbs. Peace and quiet at long last. The tranquility of an empty world at night. Nothing quite like it. Just a man and his thoughts. At first I hardly registered the gentleman on the pavement across the road. The man who had been matching my pace for several minutes. My brain was foggy after working 12 hours. But above all else, I had no cause for alarm. The tension of the day was dissipating from my body. Even a bitter, wintry night in Liverpool was better than the monotony of the office. It was as I turned to cross the road that I finally paid attention to him. The moment I stopped and turned, the man also stopped, but he did not face me. The stranger waited at the other side of the street and continued to stare directly ahead. He could have been a senile man, but that explanation did not slot neatly into the picture. There was something clunky about him. He did not belong. It wasn't about the lateness of the hour. No, it was about his demeanour. He seemed fragile, and yet he did not shiver in the biting breeze. He was simply glued to the pavement and staring forwards. "Excuse me," I said as I began to cross the road. "Are you okay?" The man did not shift his feet, but as I approached him, he twisted his neck to follow my movements. Feeling slightly uneasy around him, I stood a couple of feet away from the man on the pavement. There was something deeply unsettling about his face. Bags sank below his brown eyes that had the look of something false, something constructed to maintain appearances. His skin was askew on his skull, as if something else were underneath, and he was sad, so very sad. In answer to my question, he shook his head. The corners of his lips turned farther downwards, emphasizing the deep sorrow that he felt. "May I help you to get home?" I asked the old man. He did not speak. He simply shook his head again, a little more vigorously this time. His sulk deepened, and his brown eyes broadened. His gaze bolted tightly onto my face. Something about the man terrified me, but I couldn't say why. "All right," I said. "Have a good night." Before I turned, I did something that would forsake me. I smiled at him. It was the briefest display of kindness, but one that opened the gateway to hell. The man's brown eyes filled with blackness, and he began to shake his head slowly. Before I had a chance to ask what I'd done wrong, the man's bones began to crack, and then, inexplicably, he grew. His limbs lengthened. The man rose into a looming, malformed spectre. I screamed and sprinted away from the abnormal thing, the thing that I could hear clomping after me. "Help!" I cried, running down residential streets. Dogs barked and lights appeared in houses, but nobody answered my call. In fact, I saw curtains swiftly close. In the eyes of those homeowners, I must have just been another drunken fool returning home from the lash. I swiveled around, preparing to meet my maker, but the man was gone. I stood in the middle of the road, panting heavily. I was still a 15-minute walk from my house, but I didn't want that thing following me home. I noticed the local playground in the middle of the street. It was illuminated by a single lamppost, and it seemed marginally safer to be somewhere well lit and semi-sheltered. So I jumped over the fence and beelined for the small wooden structure in the middle. I crawled up the ladder and hid in the children's building. Police? Yes, I thought about calling them, but I had just witnessed something that defied all earthly explanation. I didn't think red and blue flashing lights could save me. That was when I scoured the internet for help, and I found the user I mentioned at the start of this tale. One particular message rang alarm bells in my head. "Stay away from doors," she messaged. "He can use them to find you." My eyes immediately shot to the plastic saloon doors which flapped in the wind, the entrance to my hiding place. Then, without a moment's warning, fingers slithered through the opening and curled around the plastic. I unleashed a primal cry as I swung my foot at the ominous hand.
Ow!
A voice yelled. When I opened the doors, I found myself facing a short, scruffy teenager. Not the Morose Man. The boy was lying on the squishy rubber flooring of the playground, massaging his hand. He looked up at me with stern eyes.
Why did you do that?
He cried. Who are you? I asked, anxiously surveying the lightless play area.
Get out of here.
Me? The boy scoffed, climbing to his feet. No, you need to get out of here. I'm sleeping in there tonight. Noting the boy's rags and greasy hair, I had already assumed him to be homeless, and on any other night I would have offered him some help. But all I could think about in that moment was the 10-foot-tall monstrosity which was relentlessly pursuing me. It was still out there, somewhere, lurking in the darkness beyond the fence. The wind was picking up, and as I eyed the colourless nothingness beyond the play area, I couldn't help but feel watched. I suddenly felt very exposed. The playground no longer seemed like a cosy island in the darkness. Listen, I don't care how much you've had to drink, the teenager started. You don't understand, I told the boy. It's not safe to... A heavy creak sounded from behind me, and my eyes shot around to the back of the wooden structure. My body seized in fear, and I expected to find myself facing those dreadful eyes. But there was nothing at the back of the playhouse, only the endless night beyond the fence. And then there came a sudden crunch, like the sound of a boot in snow. I spun my head back to the front of the playground, and I found myself witnessing a scene of unimaginable horror. The gate to the park was swinging to and fro. The abomination of a man towered in the entrance. His mouth had stretched beyond the limits of his face, and half of the poor boy's body had disappeared down the creature's throat. The teen's legs twitched for a few moments before he fell limp, and the Morose Man greedily finished his horrifying meal. I could see the outline of the boy's carcass bulging through the Morose Man's thin flesh. The lumpy meat slowly passed through its digestive system, bloating the being into something even larger, something twice as imposing. The entity wiped its lips, smiled, and took measured steps towards me. I backed into the corner of the wooden structure. There was no escape. I accepted that, and I watched the man's awful bony fingers weave through the crack between the saloon doors. With his rotting fingernails mere inches from my face, the Morose Man suddenly froze. He eyed me with black pupils and bellowed. He spat fragments of flesh and guts throughout the playhouse, and then the ferocious being fled into the darkness. Struggling to believe that I had been spared the same fate as the boy, I frantically checked my phone. Midnight. I survived.
We keep our kindness. Every morning, my mother would repeat that bleak mantra, and I would sigh, whilst absent-mindedly nodding my head in agreement. Mum and I were the opposing poles of a magnet. We gelled, but our beliefs sat at distant ends of the scale. Not political beliefs, beliefs about the fundamental nature of humanity. I was soft, like Dad, and Mum knew that. After what happened, I found a happy medium. Dad died when I was a little boy. He was a good man, and I don't mean that in the obligatory, cliched way. He was truly a good man. Too good, in my mum's words. My father unintentionally killed himself with kindness. On a late night commute home, a man attempted to rob him, but Dad, being Dad, tried to help the assailant, who was only 19 years old, little more than a child. My father reached for his phone, offering to search for a hostel so the boy had somewhere to sleep. However, the teenager panicked when he saw Dad move. In an instant, he stabbed my father. None of the other passengers did anything until the boy fled the train. Someone eventually called 999, and another person tried to stop the bleeding. They kept Dad warm, but my father passed away on the cold, unforgiving bench of Platform 1. Neither Mum nor I had been by his side during those final moments. He passed before paramedics even arrived. In contrast, my mother is difficult. She is not a cruel woman. She loves me, but she's nothing like Dad. She's tough, cynical, and reserved. Once, she even offered me a scathing look for donating to a friendly man on the street. How many times, Nathan? We keep our kindness. That's how we survive, she said. It's a charity, Mum, I sighed, dropping a penny into the smiling man's bucket. Relax. I am relaxed, she huffed. Let's go home. I'm not a child. I'm 25, and I have a steady income. I know I should have moved out, but it isn't safe to leave my mother on her own. Dad's been dead for 6 years, and she only worsens with every passing anniversary. Her sturdy demeanour was once her strength, but it has become her weakness. To the rest of the world, she's nothing more than an unkind woman. I'm the only one who knows the real her, the only one who knows why she became this way. And it wasn't just Dad's death. The curtains! Mum winced, hurrying to the window. How many times do I have to tell you, Nathan? I sighed, patting the sofa cushion beside me. I'll try to remember. Come on, Mum. Let's watch some TV. Kitchen Nightmares? You hate that show, she sighed, sitting on the very edge of the sofa cushion. Yeah, but you like it, I said. I'll just catch up on some work. No, I should probably make us some dinner, Mum muttered. No, I'm cooking dinner tonight, okay? I insisted. You've got to let me do something around the house, she scoffed. I shook my head. I'm 25 and I'm living at home with my mother. No, I'm cooking the meals. That's final. Okay, well, what are we having then, Chef? She asked, offering a rare smile. I was thinking that bangers and mash might be... shoot. I forgot to get the potatoes. I'll have to nip to the shop, I said, jumping off the sofa. Mum tutted. It's 9 o'clock in the evening, Nathan. That's too late. It's fine, Mum. The shop will be open for another hour or so, I said. My mother groaned and shifted uncertainly. She was nearing the edge of the cushion on which she precariously perched. No, I don't like you walking around in the dark, she said. I placed a kiss on Mum's forehead, ruffled her hair, and chuckled as she straightened her locks. I'm an adult and I'll be fine, I said. I'll see you in 10 minutes. Mum shouted something after me, and though I'd already slammed the door, I knew exactly what she said. The same thing she said whenever I left the house. Remember that we don't smile at strangers, Nathan. And I was going to learn that Mum's words of caution had both nothing and everything to do with the death of my father. The real reason I did the cooking was that Mum wasn't well. She hardly left the house, She was a mortgage advisor, and she'd been working entirely from home since 2020. I frequently had to drag her out of the house while she wriggled and whined. And wherever we went, Mum watched people with eerie eagle eyes. The slightest motion would make her twitch, and she treated strangers like criminals. This behaviour didn't start immediately after Dad's death. It started 4 years ago, during the early days of the pandemic. One evening, my mother returned home in tears, and she barely spoke. Mum had been delivering Grandma shopping, and she bumped into a rather sullen-looking man. He wasn't wearing a face mask, which made my mum a little uncomfortable, but she didn't want to antagonise him. So, she did the thing that Grandma had always taught her to do. Mum smiled at him. However, the man simply shook his head, deepening the sorrowful expression on his face. My mum claimed the man grew 10 feet tall and pursued her home. At the time, it seemed to me that the trauma of the situation had caused her to exaggerate certain details. I was certain Mum had been pursued by a horrible man, but I didn't believe in the supernatural aspects of her tale. She buried herself in research, and one day, she found answers. Mum started ranting and raving about the Morose Man, a gentleman who stalks those who make the unknowing mistake of smiling at him. At the stroke of midnight, he tires and ceases. It seemed like nonsense to me, though over the following years, I did notice that name in online circles. People mentioned encounters with the Morose Man on forums. You might have seen his name too. I thought it to be nothing but an elaborate form of collaborative fan fiction, much like the Backrooms or Slender Man. And my mum was the unfortunate wounded soul caught in the fray, a woman already fractured by her husband's death, susceptible to influence. I wasn't diminishing her experience. A traumatic encounter with a terrible man had broken her completely. But he was just a man, I told her. My scepticism would soon unravel. "Sir?" the shop owner repeated. Foggy-eyed, I'd been staring at the cigarettes behind the disinterested corner shop owner, yearning for them, though it was a habit I'd tried hard to kick. My entire existence had been consumed by Mum, sheltering her, trying to heal her. It was rare for me to get a moment to myself, and I often daydreamed in the shop. Food trips were small windows of peace, but I reminded myself that my mum thought the same when I was young. And living with Mum was my own decision. She had frequently tried to get me to settle down with my girlfriend. "Sorry," I said, pulling out my credit card. "How much is it?" £14.36, the man repeated, sighing quietly. I nodded and pointed at the cigarettes. A packet of those two, please." Following the horrors that I'm about to reveal, I found healthier coping mechanisms. I stopped seeking happiness at the butt of a combustible cancer cylinder. "Watch your step," the owner warned as I exited his corner shop. It was too late. I tripped, and my bag of food spilled at the feet of a man by the bus shelter. "Oh, sorry," I gushed. I proceeded to scoop up my fallen items, cheeks flushing from embarrassment. The milk carton had burst, spilling its contents into a growing puddle around the man's shoes. Would you like me to clean those for you? I know a good laundrette." "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said. The man didn't respond. His eyes rigidly watched me. There was something about him which didn't sit well. As if it were an outfit, he wore drooping flesh. It barely belonged to the body that it covered. His eyes looked black. I I'm really sorry, sir, I said, sheepishly collecting my shopping and standing up. Then I did something Mum had warned me to never do. I smiled at the man, and the man did not smile back. He shook his head, and his face adopted a look twice as sullen. The air froze in fright, and the moon cowered behind rain clouds, robbing the street of any light other than the flickering fluorescent tube above the harrowed gentleman. But as a shiver traversed the length of my body, I started to think that the man might not be unhappy at all. A scene unfolded that you might struggle to believe. The man's arms and legs lengthened, as did his shabby, ill-fitting farmer's clothes. And as he rose, his head tore through the metal roof of the bus shelter. I stumbled backwards, eyeing the malignant monstrosity before me. My mother hadn't imagined anything. The Morose Man was real, and I shouldn't have smiled at him. We keep our kindness. My fingers automatically released the shopping bag, and I ran. The route home seemed to have grown longer and darker. The moonlight had vanished from the world, and my breathing quickened as, one by one, the streetlights turned off. But as I sprinted into the blackness, I realised that I could not hear anything behind me. I spun on my heel to face the pursuing man, but there was nobody in my wake. Only a demolished bus shelter in the distance, and a few remaining streetlights. Still, I didn't stop to search for the horrifying creature beyond our world. I continued running until I arrived home. As I neared our house, however, my relief was rapidly replaced with fear. The front door was ajar. Did I lock it? I whispered to myself, inching closer to the ominous opening. No, I know I did. I unsteadily entered our barren, unlit home.
Mum?
I cried.
Are you okay?
She did not respond. So I inched along the ground floor of our abandoned house. I could hear only the rhythmic beat of my heart against my chest. Everything was still in its place. We hadn't been burgled. But there was that chill in the air. The stillness I felt at the bus shelter. A sense that Mother Nature had seen something which made her fearful. Somewhere near, there lay a terror which did not belong. I completed a full circuit of the floor. Then I eyed the upstairs landing from the safety of the downstairs hall. Light poured into the entryway from the street, yet it did not, somehow, seem able to reach the upper floor of the house. Something about that filled me with dread. The blackness of the second floor seemed foreboding, but I made my way up the stairs, one groaning step at a time. I clutched the banister with more might than I knew I possessed, and I hardly wanted to let go when I eventually reached the landing. I pulled my phone out and lit the way with the flashlight. "Mum," I whispered, voice cracking. "Where are you?" Still no reply. I searched every room, but I found nothing. Not a furnishing out of place, not a thing stolen, other than my mother. "She left the house," I reassured myself. "Yeah, she went somewhere. She went looking for you." That thought stilled the restlessness gripping my body, and I turned to head back downstairs. Then, as I swung my flashlight across the upstairs landing, I glimpsed a slight movement at the window. The blackened window, unnaturally black. I couldn't see the outline of the street beyond the glass pane, but I could see something disturbingly familiar. A rippling movement beyond the pane, and then two blackened curtains of skin parted. A megalithic eyeball filled the window. The black pupil eyed the insect in the house, and the insect yelled in terror as the enormous eye shifted to the left. The giant vanished from view, allowing the light from street lamps to pour through the window once more. When I ran into the street, he was gone. I knew it was the Morose Man, and I knew he'd taken my mother. I spent half a day lying on the living room carpet in a semi-comatose state. I was unable to process the awful things I'd just witnessed. My concept of reality was wrong. I had once been so certain about the laws of nature, so certain about everything having a place. But there was no place for the thing I'd just seen. Even its skin sat uncertainly on its head, itching to escape the horror it covered. But what did lie beneath? I didn't want to know. And I was stuck. I didn't know what to do. The sunlight had been scorching my pale, unmoving face for hours when I finally mustered the will to move. I sat upright and pulled my limp, shivering body to the sofa. My laptop was still sitting on the cushion. In a flustered panic, I began researching the Morose Man. I scoured every crevice of the internet, and I reached out to the numerous people who'd reported sightings of the unholy being. One particular Discord server, titled 11, proved useful. Members gave me advice with regards to surviving the entity. "I don't need to survive," I replied. "He's taken my mother." The help ended there. People offered their condolences. Everyone except Throwaway Girl 125X9. "I saw him over a year ago," she said. "I still spend every waking hour wondering whether he might be hiding around each corner. I understand your mother's fear. I feel it too. I don't trust strangers anymore, and I certainly don't take the train. I just live in my room, endlessly online, endlessly searching for answers. Though I don't know the true nature of this entity, I do know a way in which we could save your mother. She isn't dead. You said he grew to an unimaginable size. That means he hadn't been fed. And I don't think he intends to consume your mother. He only eats victims who are full of joy. Those like him, full of pain, join his collection. I've learnt things over the past year. I learnt of a ritual, something I've outlined in the attached document. It'll open a gateway to his world." "How do I trust you?" I asked. "You don't, and I don't trust you. That's why I won't come to help you. And I don't leave my house anyway. But the internet feels safe, doesn't it? It feels removed from all this horror, somehow. It can be whatever we want it to be. I trust an online stranger even less than a stranger on the street. You could be anyone or anything. How do I know you haven't sent a ritual that would lead to something worse?" I asked. "Okay, I'll tell you something. My name is Paige Mulligan. I'm 26 and I live in Manchester. There, you know more than you should. Don't make me regret that. And I'm telling you that this ritual is the only way to save your mum. Either try or lose her forever. Those are your options," Paige said. Caught between a rock and a treacherous place, I decided to hold onto the thing which separated me from my mother. I still had some faith in mankind. I still trusted in the kindness of humanity, despite my haunting encounter with the Morose Man. I read the scripture that Paige had provided. Firstly, I shut all doors in the living room, as instructed. and as I spoke the Morose Man's summoning sentence, I clenched my body. I expected the sound of tolling bells from the Earth's undercarriage. I expected the ground to shift beneath my feet. I expected hellfire and a storm like none the world had ever seen. Instead, my living room door softly clicked, and it squeaked open. I trembled at the sight of blackness beyond the open doorway, realizing that my downstairs hallway no longer lay beyond the living room. And as I stepped towards the exit, my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I discerned a damp outdoor alley, an alleyway which led to a garish yellow door. As I began my journey along the ominous passage, I continuously glanced over my shoulder, ensuring that my living room had not disappeared. But when I reached the bright door at the end of the alleyway, I knew that I had to abandon all semblance of safety. I grabbed the door handle and twisted it. My eyes were greeted by something vile and vibrant, a one-floor house that looked artificially generated. A cluster of mismatched colours covered the interior of the tiny bungalow. Red and blue walls, green carpet, and beyond the entryway, a never-ending row of rooms stretched to the horizon. It was a limitless liminal space, and my mother was buried somewhere in the depths of that malicious maze. I decided to walk directly ahead, as I knew I would lose my way if I were to deviate from that path. Each room was less convincing than the last. The colours grew busier, and the furnishings grew more disjointed. There was also an unsettling mixture of maroon stains and damaged paint. "Nathan!" The whisper jolted my heart, and I flew into the far wall of the kitchen, the 13th one I'd explored in that demented home. When I turned, I found myself facing a frail, withered woman on an obscenely tall dining chair in the corner of the room. She was barely recognisable. "Mum?" I croaked. "What are you doing here?" she asked in a sinisterly stiff voice. "I came to save you," I said. "This is my hole," she muttered, transfixed by the walls of the kitchen. "I belong here." "No, you don't," I urged, starting to tug her arms. "He knows I'll never smile again," Mum moaned, staring blankly at the wall. I yanked, and she tumbled off the chair. My mother snapped out of the trance, but she continued to fight me.
Leave me here,
she cried. "No, Mum, please." "He won't haunt you again," she promised. "He has me. That's all he wanted." "I'm not going to let him trap you anymore," I firmly said. "Your father would have. He would have made it all better," Mum bawled, whilst I dragged her through the endless line of rooms to the yellow front door. A whirring sound, like living machinery, came from the walls of the endless bungalow, and the vibrant colours began to swirl into something far darker, far murkier. "Mum, please," I urged. "Dad's gone now. He's gone. But we're still here. We get to move forwards." "It isn't safe," Mum cried. "You won't be safe. The shadow hangs over me." The blackness was spreading across the walls like a fungus, and I was hurrying my resistant mother out of the Morose Man's haunted house. "We'll find a way through this," I said, pulling my mother into the main entryway. "We'll do it together." I opened the yellow door, eyeing our escape route with a tremendous sense of victory in my heart. But then I heard a terrifying sound. I cranked my head around and my eyes met a frightfully familiar sight. The Morose Man. An entity which slipped out of the blackened walls of his unmasked home. No false colours remained, only the true darkness that had been there all along. The Morose Man was smaller than before, but his face was worse. It was not even feigning humanity. He watched us with undeniably black eyes, and his mouth hung slackly, large enough to consume my mother and me. Eyeing the dark alleyway which bridged the gap between the creature's world and earth, I reached for my mother's hand.
How do you know that we won't suffer again?
Mum asked in a frightened whisper. I don't, I whispered. My mother looked into my eyes as the Morose Man launched towards us, limbs squeezing through narrow doorways. She nodded, grasped my hand, and ran with me. We darted through the black alleyway and catapulted our bodies through the living room door. After scrambling to my feet, I closed the entrance, hoping to obstruct the ever-nearing entity. Footsteps echoed around the alleyway on the other side of the door. I raced to complete the final step of the ritual. To sever the bridge between worlds, a new door must be opened. I lunged towards the kitchen, and as the main door to the living room flew from its hinges, I swung the second door open. My mother and I cried as the Morose Man withered into darkness, a mere metre away from us. Thankfully, on the other side of the open living room door, our downstairs hallway stood in place of that supernatural alleyway. We have not seen him since that day, and we're both moving forwards. I even visited Paige. I didn't know the girl, of course, but I felt obligated to thank her in person. Obligated, perhaps, to save her. She and my mother still struggled to trust the world. They struggled to trust strangers. Men. In time, I hope that changes. If the Morose Man exists, perhaps miracles exist too. I won't hold my breath.